if you do that, you can't do it at the release time anymore, right? Because this becomes like too late in the life cycle, right? And you can't also like release note it. You can't say, oh, I have like 200 critical vulnerabilities, 500 highs, and yeah, I'm just release noting it, and customer will be like, no, I'm happy with what I have. I don't need your new features. Go and fix the security vulnerabilities first, right?
Welcome to the DevSec for Scale podcast, the show that makes security a first-class citizen for growing companies. My name is Jeremy Hess, Head of Developer Relations at Achilles, the secrets management SaaS platform. This interview podcast brings security experts and practitioners together to offer practical and actionable ways for small and growing companies to implement security best practices using shift-left principles without interrupting developer life cycles. Welcome back, everyone, to the DevSec for Scale podcast. My name is Jeremy Hess, Head of Developer Relations at Achilles, and today I have a really great guest. His name is Harshit Chitalia, and he's the CTO and founder or co-founder of Tromzo. And Tromzo is a really cool startup, actually trying to do something similar to what we're trying to do as a podcast and as a community. Of course, you're doing it with a product. We're just doing it with a community. And I'm sure you have a community as well that you're building. But the idea being a product that enables developers to ensure that they are implementing security into their daily development practices. And it's really cool to see more companies focusing on the security aspect. So thanks Harshit, for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be here and really looking forward to this.
Really cool. Yeah, we're going to get into a lot of interesting topics here. And before we get into more about that and a little bit about you and the company, let's get right into it. What would you say is a way to keep feature velocity in a product, but making sure that security is done properly?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question, right? Because everybody wants to do something about security, right? But they don't know where to start, or even if they know, then how do they keep on going with it, right? So what we've learned through both my experience as well as talking to like other security founders as well as security leaders from organizations like Google and Airbnb, Netflix, right? They all share these things that have worked with them, and also like how things have worked or evolved even in small startups, right? If you look at it, security has evolved in the last 10 years quite a bit, right? We started with the whole firewall security where everything was like going through a VPN. So within your access, like everybody had access to everything, right? Then we started with all those zero trust initiatives. Today, what we are is what I kind of call it like everything software security, right? What I mean by that is now your network is software, your infrastructure is software, right? Because you're coding everything up, right? You're coding infrastructure. You no longer configure a Cisco box, you actually configure AWS load balancers, right? You are managing all your secrets, right? It's no longer like how it used to be done earlier. And today, if I look at any product, right, it doesn't have to be even just like a small startup, but even like big companies, developers are writing only 30% of the code, right? The rest of it is coming in through dependencies and other products that you're using, right? Like pretty much everybody is using Redis, everybody's using MongoDB. So then any vulnerabilities or any security incidents happening in any of those services are also affecting you, right? So then with keeping all of this thing in mind, how do you go about securing and moving fast? Because at the end of the day, a customer is not going to pay you money because your thing is secure. I mean, it's just a baseline, right? They assume since you're providing a product or a service, it is secure, but they're going to pay you for features, right? So you need to ship fast. You need to stay ahead of your competition and as well as make it secure. So how do you do that, right? So to do it, like it's essentially like, I would say people, product, or technology, and process, right? Like how do you kind of manage all of these three things together and create a program that envisions that you could go ahead and build a good solid security program is the key essential thing, right? If you just do one thing and not the other, then it won't work, right? So you have to do all three of them so that it kind of stays well. So we can start with like technology, right? Like how can you kind of make changes and things that are now available for you, right? Like may not be available, let's say 3 years before this, but today you can use all of that, right? So basic things like, for example, checking for vulnerabilities and dependencies, right? So GitHub has a simple tool called Dependabot, right? You can basically enable that in every PR, right? It automatically scans for it. So it is giving you those notifications in real time. Similarly for like secret scanning, right? So you have secret scanning that you can do on a PR by PR basis. You can go to the other extreme and you make it part of your Git hooks itself. So it's no longer even in the PR. Like you can go, and this is what we call about shifting left, right? Like you can actually shift left to the extreme that developers, even before they are pushing code just in their IDE, they are able to kind of have this in process, right? And so you have all these different layers of these tools that you can use them. Now, it's when all these tools came into play, that the typical thing was, okay, we'll deploy everything in production, then a security engineer will go and test this, right? If you do that, it's too late, right? You're deploying to production today 3 times a day. Earlier you used to do it like once in 6 months. Now, so at that time that was fine. You had a central security team, they could iterate through all the different products and make things work. Right now they have no idea if you deployed, let's say, a new code repo and actually, pushed it to production. Like one of our customers has 3,500 repos. They are just 200 engineers in the organization. How do you think that the security team even knows which out of the 3,500 are deployed to production? They just don't, right? So they have no visibility on like scanning or like how many vulnerabilities are there. So the goal here is to kind of get to a point where things are automated. You have visibility from the tech perspective that you're doing all these basic things. You're monitoring your crown jewels, as we kind of call them, and making sure that you have a way to kind of monitor it day in, day out. Then the second thing comes in terms of like people, right? So how do you motivate your engineers to kind of really go ahead and be upright about security? Yes, I want to fix security vulnerabilities, because what happens is that they get paid to fix bugs, and they get paid even more to kind of ship features. But if an engineer comes to you and tells you, oh, I spent all my day in fixing this vulnerability, you would be like, why are you wasting your time, right? So it's a culture thing, right? And if you don't have that culture of like security becomes everybody's responsibility, then that is going to be really difficult to kind of foster that kind of that teamwork to kind of make this thing happen, right? And it cannot come out as like a top-down approach. Oh, now we have 100 critical bugs, so let's stop doing everything and like go and fix this, because you will never go out of it, right? Like it will always be like every 6 months you'll have to do that hammer work, and by that time, that 6 months, your code is sitting out there vulnerable like a duck, right? Like you can basically get hacked anytime. So then, like, how do you embed some of these things, right? It could be through like education, like, workshops that you could do about training people about security, like secure software development. At the same time, having some things like, pretty much I would say every developer I know, I mean, this is a big generalization, but every developer is a gamer, right? At the end of the day. So how can you go ahead and gamify some of these things? Like have leaderboards, right? Give out rewards based on like how many people are like reviewing and finding security vulnerabilities, at the same time fixing those vulnerabilities, right? So there's a lot that can be done through culture. And then finally, it's like a process, right? Like you define policies and process that, let's say a critical incident happened. What are those things that you need to do? And this falls a little bit into the, like I would say the security teams already have those things in place, right? Because of the compliance reasons that they do it. But I've never seen engineering teams focus on that, right? Let's say I get a log4j, like engineering teams did not know what to do, right? I mean, then the whole thing came from security saying that, okay, you have to go and fix it. And then everybody's sprints went haywire because now they are kind of fixing this and not something else, because they did not have a process in place to kind of go and address those things, right? So having process in place where things not about like that just come out of nowhere, but also like how do you track it, right? Like let's say you want to ask for an extension, or you may want to kind of say that, hey, this is not something that we are going to use in production at all. So maybe it is okay that maybe we don't need to fix it, right? So maybe having processes defined about like what is important, what is not important, if this happens, what needs to be done. So then that thing is uniform across the company, across all your engineering teams, and not just a single engineering team doing whatever they feel like, right? So I know you asked me like a simple question, but the answer is little long. But we need to do all these three things, and each of them have. I mean, we just build like the first layer, right? We can go into much more depth into understanding how we can go and address these three things as well. But that is, I would say, a good way to kind of make sure that you can develop fast at the same time develop with something which is secure.
Absolutely. Great. That was a full answer, I would say, to the question. And there's a lot to unpack. And what's interesting to me is more of the research that you recently did. But before we get into talking about that developer research, tell us a little bit, Harshit, about yourself and about what you're trying to accomplish at Tromzo.
Yeah, absolutely. So before starting Tromzo, right, I used to lead data engineering products at Juniper Networks, right? So I was head of engineering, shipping all of the visibility products at Juniper Networks. Pretty much every packet that you see on the internet, right? We were monitoring it in some forms, right? Like, so all our customers were telco providers like Deutsche Telekom or Fujitsu. They were basically using our tools to kind of make sure that their data centers run correctly and efficiently, right? And before that, I was the head of engineering for a startup called Appformix, where we did OpenStack monitoring and capabilities around that, right? So all my life, I've been like, either a software engineer developing software or managing a team of like really passionate engineers trying to build software, right? So I've lived through this pain point of like how security would come in with a big hammer and be like, okay, do this, right? And the worst thing is that in the last few years, right, like customers got like more educated about security as well, right? So now if you ship software, which is like they can actually like go and scan for these things, right? Let's say you're shipping a container and they are able to scan that container, they will find all these vulnerabilities and they will be like, dude, you shipped me something which is not secure, right? Like, how is that? Like, why would I deploy this in my network? And so now you started kind of scanning all of those as well as a preemptive thing. And then you can't go, and if you do that, you can't do it at the release time anymore, right? Because this becomes like too late in the life cycle, right? And you can't also like release note it. You can't say, oh, I have like 200 critical vulnerabilities, 500 highs, and yeah, I'm just release noting it, and customer will be like, no, I'm happy with what I have. I don't need your new features. Go and fix the security vulnerabilities first, right? So those were like some of the interesting conversations I used to have back at Juniper. And I thought there has to be a better way to manage this, right? And so we went out, me and my co-founder, to kind of talk to like other security teams in the Valley to kind of understand like how they were building some of these technologies and how they were managing risk, right? Because at the end of the day, you're managing risk. Like there's no software, like we're talking on Zoom. I'm pretty sure the Zoom application has a tons of vulnerabilities right now, right? But they're managing the risk, right? They are saying that, okay, this particular vulnerability cannot be accessed by an attack vector because he cannot do X, Y, and Z, right? So their goal is to kind of manage that risk. But how do you do it efficiently and at scale is like all of these teams build software in-house to kind of manage that, right? And there was nothing out there in the market that we could see that we could kind of use. So we decided, let's start a company about it. We got like, I would say 26 CISOs from well-known companies like Coinbase to like Robinhood who joined us in this mission that, yes, something like this is necessary. And then we were funded by Eric Schmidt's fund. Eric Schmidt is a former CEO of Google. And so here we are and building this product and driving the message through the community that there's something available today, like the tech is available today to kind of help not only secure software, but also ship fast as well.
Great. Yeah. So that brings us now to the voice of the modern developer. And
Right.
that's the name of the research paper, we'll call it, that you put together, where you asked over 400 developers about baking security into development practices. And for everyone listening, I will go ahead and put the link to that research, the blog post at least, in the notes of the show. So let's get right into this research. What was the idea behind it, and what were you trying to accomplish, and what were some interesting findings?
Yeah. So, like as I was describing, we went and talked to a bunch of security people in all these leading companies. And then once we started the company, we wanted to kind of really understand how deep is this problem, right? Like, and so we decided, okay, we're going to go and do a broader level search, right? Like not only look at tech companies, but look at other verticals as well, like in retail, in healthcare and banking, and so on and so forth. So we went and surveyed 400 developers, and there were a few things which were obvious, that we knew, but it was good to kind of verify them within the results of the survey. And then there were some which were just outstanding. Oh my God, like this is much more worse than what I expected it to be, right? So some of the key findings that came out were like developers are fixing only 32% of the vulnerabilities, right? So basically, if I show this to my security team or any security team, they'll be astonished, right? Like, because now you are throwing away 2/3 of the work that you were doing. So security team goes and finds these vulnerabilities, and developers are saying, no, I'm not even fixing it, right? So it's very, very like I would say a noisy market, right? Like, and the other thing that came out was like a third of the overall vulnerabilities were also noise. Like, so we clearly need to do better at just the scanning capabilities as well. Like the scanners that coming out, they're not doing a good job with like what kind of reports that they're generating out of it, right? So we need to definitely do better from a tech perspective. That was kind of interesting. The other interesting thing that came out was like 60%, 62% of the developers were using 11 or more tools in their environment. So that just shows you today, like how complicated development has become, right? And so for people who want to understand what are these 11 tools, right? So let me describe like how a traditional app would look like, right? So let's say you are writing a simple app to kind of, let's say, a grocery application, right? Like, so basically you can order groceries. So if your typical tech stack, let's say using a SQL database on Amazon, right? Because you don't know how to kind of configure a database, right? So you use something on RDS. Let's you writing your own application. You use Django or some framework like that in Python. Then you have a web interface and then a mobile interface. So on a web, you use React, and on iOS, you'll use Swift or something. Then you're using caching, so you're using Redis, right? So let's say this is your simple application. Now, if I have to make this application secure, I first need to go ahead and make sure that I'm running like a basic infrastructure scan, right? So, and just scanning the infrastructure code itself, right? So there are two scanners right there. One is a runtime scan, and one is an infrastructure as code scan, right? So there are two tools already. Now you're managing all these keys of AWS and your database and like a lot of other things in your code. So then you need a secret scan. You're using all these dependencies like Django and React and all of those. And if you have developed anything on front end, you know how many dependencies Node.js can have, right? So then you have your dependency scanner. And so then there is the code that you write, like, so you have a code scanner for that. Then you have API, so you have an API scanner for that, right? So if you can keep on going like this, right, like you're shipping all of this in a container, so the container scan, you're using Kubernetes, so there's a Kubernetes scanner, right? And then for every language that you use in your environment, there will be a scanner for that as well, right? Because Go will have something else, Python will have something else, and every modern app will use at least 3 to 4. So having 11 is not, I would say, an out of like something, okay, only a few teams are using. I think 11 has now become a norm, right? If you want to kind of do that. Now, as a developer, if I had to go and look at even 11 tickets on Jira, I would go mad. Right now, just imagine I have 11 tabs out of security telling me that I have to do something about it. There's no way that I'm going to be able to do it. Right. So now there needs to be a layer on top of it, which kind of becomes your system of record of what those 11 tools are kind of doing that. Right. And you have to solve that from a tech perspective before you can actually make decent process or decent progress over what you're doing. So that was like really, really interesting that people are already so neck deep into the tooling that they need to kind of make sure that things are secure. And the other tidbit that came out was that the primary challenge, was like developers were not, following through on the AppSec program, and this is not a problem, I would say. I mean, this is a little bit more of a people and process kind of an issue where, like security teams are doing all they can in their possible way, but developers are not reacting to it, right? They're not receptive to it, right? And we talked about it previously as well, how you can kind of go and address some of those things, but that also was one of the things that kind of came out, right? So that was kind of expected, but like some of the other things that we talked about, like 11 or more tools, only 1/3 vulnerabilities are getting fixed, 1/3 are noise, were kind of a little bit more on the side than what we had expected to find in the survey.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of you said about 32% of vulnerabilities that are found are fixed by developers, and the rest of them are left alone or not fixed in a timely manner. How would you really rank? Obviously we know that there are different ways of ranking vulnerabilities, low, medium, high, and very severe. So right. Is there a better method for sort of weeding through the vulnerabilities and making sure that, it sort of makes life easier on the developers to be able to react better to all those vulnerabilities that are found?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are ways in which you can go ahead and really ensure that you can quickly go through some of those things, right? Let's say, so for example, it's a challenge on the tooling as well, right? Like a lot of security tools were initially developed to be addressed by security folks, right? So for example, let's say you have like a decent deployment of like over 500 servers, and you're using, let's say, a Linux server on all of like a Linux operating system. If there's a vulnerability, it will report 500 findings for you right now. The fix is going to be to upgrade like that one single package or something, and you can easily do it on 500 machines, like because you pretty much would have automated those things right now. So then the goal is like, how do you translate that and make sure that you have a single ticket that addresses all of those things in an efficient way, right? And so then your priority becomes, okay, like how do I kind of look at all the vulnerabilities that I have in my system and prioritize them by understanding what is the true impact of this fix, right? So if certain vulnerabilities may be localized and could be infecting only one server or one particular instance, whereas something could be fleet-wide, right? So you can then go ahead and prioritize and understand what is fleet-wide, and you can kind of go and fix that. The other thing is around just the mitigation, right? Like you could have one package which is giving you 10 different kinds of vulnerabilities, and all the fix for all of them is basically upgrading that package or like, making sure that you don't use that package. So whatever that fix is or that mitigation is, you could actually group a bunch of vulnerabilities together and based on that, go ahead and just prioritize it, right? And kind of figuring out what you kind of need to do. But the most important thing, the reason I told you these two, because these were the kind of low hanging fruits, but the real thing that will solve most of your use cases is figuring out what are your crown jewels, right? anything that happens in your crown jewels, and by crown jewels I mean like your databases, right? Basically not everything that is getting stored, but like say you're storing any PI information, credit card information, or any of your main production services which are exposed to the internet or getting direct traffic from the internet. Those are your crown jewels, right? So how do you kind of go ahead and protect those becomes really, really imperative. And kind of in your whole environment, understanding what those are, understanding what vulnerabilities exist from those, because even a medium on a crown jewel could become critical for you, right? Because that medium is just based on like a bunch of different vectors, right? Like they have a different definition of CVSS vector and things like that, which tell you like, okay, because of these combination of things that you can do those. And similarly, like you could have a critical, but it is no longer really applicable in your environment because that is only accessible through a network attack vector. And in the way you're using that service, there's no clear path from the network to that service, right? Like it's not internet exposed. So you should be able to kind of figure these policies out and define these in your environment. And so what the tooling is telling you is one thing, and it's giving you the criticals and the highs. But at the same time, if you mix that, I would say, operational data that is coming from the scanners with the runtime environment and the runtime context that you have within your environment, which is kind of unique to do. If you merge both of these together, then the result is what you get is your prioritized list, right? And that will help you solve those things, because at the end of the day, you're trying to manage that risk. Like, how do I protect my crown jewels from any vulnerabilities?
Great. Yeah. So and there's a lot to go through here. What would you say are sort of like the things that you came out with from the research that you did that really kind of opened your eyes, that were like, wow, like these are really the items that we need to look at in a different way?
Yeah. So so the main thing that kind of came out of the whole piece was that there wasn't enough automation that people were doing or taking or thinking of doing from just managing this data, right? For example, all of infrastructure and DevOps has been automated, right, in every environment. Earlier, back in the day, we used to have QA engineers. Now, any development team, I mean, if you look at any modern development team, at best, they may have something called as SDET, which is software development and test. And the goal for them is also to kind of build out infrastructure for testing, right? But they are no longer writing those tests, right? So the goal is that everything has been automated away to a point where if you make some mistake in development, it's caught right there and there. But such a thing doesn't exist today. Like, I don't have an engineer who's doing software development in security. Like, I don't have an SDES position today, right? Maybe it's not required. Maybe there's tooling that can do it. But I think the bigger problem that is there today is that no customer is even using that, or not a lot of people are putting in the time or hiring engineers, right, to kind of go and build that within the engineering team, right? Security team is a different, like, you can't expect the security team to be doing this, right? In some places where we see security team is tasked to do this because they are not really software engineers, right? So they don't understand the code, they don't understand what needs to happen there. They can define policies, they can define risk, they can define compliance, but to kind of make sure that your software is actually secure, you need automation, and you need like workflows that are defined that kind of notify you, that kind of are there like your buddy that is always watching at you and nudging you in the right direction. So I think that is what is the main thing, which is, I think, really, really missing in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. That's seems really, really like an interesting point, and something that probably requires even more in-depth understanding. So that's really cool. And I assume that this is sort of part of how you decided to build your product as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, our goal was that we wanted Tromzo to be used by both security and developers, right? Because we fundamentally believe that everybody has a say in this. And if you just build a product for one and not the other, it's going to be like a different version of where we are today, but not a good version. Right. So we needed to get to a point where both of them have a say in security. The security teams go and defines the risk and the policies, and then the engineering team is able to consume and do the workflows on top of those, right? And all of it, because as I said, right, it needs to be automated away, it needs to be as policy as code, right? Like, because everything needs to be in Git, everything needs to be tracked and versioned, and you should be able to kind of have, of course, a nice UI and like with all the low code, no code configuration. So all of that is already baked in. But the goal is that both of them combine together, come together, and make sure that security is something that is seamless within the development lifecycle.
Great. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. So last question that I'll ask, which is one question that I ask to all my guests. And that question is, what is one or two things, quick fire answer, one or two things that you think developers can do right now to ensure security while they're developing, but something that's not going to take too many, cycles away from their work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a couple of things that they could really do is just, enroll themselves in some sort of security training, right? Because I feel not having that awareness of like what is secure, what are best practices and what are not, because nobody teaches that in school, right? Like security is like, unless you took that course specifically, most software developers are never go through that. And they just learn through it on the job, which is fine. But getting some formal training today, maybe a 1-hour workshop, right, of any sorts would be really good. The second thing I would definitely say is that go and ask your security team, right? Like, what is the security posture, right? Because my fundamental belief is like, if you can't see something, you are never going to fix it, or you don't even know that something is broken, right? So your first realization should be like, what can I go and what is the current landscape here, so that you kind of really understand where it is. And I would say that if your security team does not have that answer for you, then reach out to us, right? We'll be able to kind of give you that visibility in less than 2 hours. But yeah, like I think having that visibility will redefine the way you look at security instantaneously, right? So a couple of things would be go and do some secure training, get visibility into your product from security, and see how your life changes.
Yeah, that's great. And that brings us to like the whole idea of dev and ops, then DevOps, and now DevSecOps, right? So really being part of a team and making sure that you're sort of telling each other what's happening from your side, what's happening from your side, and putting it together and saying, okay, now we can sort of break it down into priorities, and we can make sure that we have the right security and making sure our product is pushed out quickly.
Right, absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Harshit, thank you so much for your time. I had a really great one, and I think that we all learned a lot from this and research paper as well, which again, I'll link to in the description so that people can go ahead and have a look. And I hope to follow up with you in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation here. And yeah, looking forward to round 2 of this.
Fantastic. Have a great one.
You too. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.